Are you considering adopting a baby in the state of Idaho and wondering if self-matching is legal, if advertising is legal, and generally what the process is? Well, if so, you're in luck because today we're having a conversation with Bart Browning, an adoption attorney in the state of Idaho. Bart has been practicing adoption law for well over 38 years and is a really great resource for us to get to know what the process is like in Idaho. Before we jump into our conversation with Bart, let me take just a minute to introduce myself in case we haven't met yet. My name is Amanda, and I'm an adoptive mom of two on a mission to help reduce overwhelm and unnecessary expense for hopeful adoptive families. I do this by helping to educate you on how to adopt a baby, as well as by creating your adoption profile and helping you share it so you can match faster. If you haven't already done so, I sure would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel. All you have to do is hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and you'll be notified each time I release a new video. All right, well, let's dive into our conversation with Bart and learn more about adoption in Idaho. We are so incredibly fortunate to have Bart joining us today to give us an overview of adoption in Idaho. Bart, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Amanda. It's great to be with you.
Awesome. Well, we are super excited to learn all things adoption in Idaho, and I know we will only be able to get to a few of those things in our conversation today. But I would love if you would just start with an overview of you and your background so our audience can get to know you a little bit better.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You know, my wife and I were married in 1980. She was 18. I was 22. Off to college we went. We thought we would have a big family. No kids came for 5 years. And so those of our peers were having children, and we were anxious to have children. So we decided to adopt, and we were fortunate enough to do, I think, what was Idaho's first open adoption back in the day. So that was 1985, and we adopted our son on short notice, and that was great. We actually met the natural mother and had a chance to be in contact with her. It was a wonderful experience. 2 years later, we adopted our second child on like 4 hours short notice, and then my wife got pregnant a few months later. So we have 3 children, 2 store-bought, 1 homegrown. We're both born and raised in Pocatello, Idaho. We now live in Twin Falls, Idaho. We've been here since '88. Because I had just passed the bar exam, I had the opportunity to be my own attorney on my children's adoptions. So it was fun to go into court. And the second time in court, my wife was, I think she was 6-7 months pregnant with our biological child. So I started noticing friends started reaching out saying, hey, we would like to adopt, or we know somebody who's been adopted. And all of a sudden I realized there were a great number of people that would like to add to their families through this great option of adoption. I enjoyed playing sports. I played a lot of baseball growing up, played 1 year of college baseball. My wife loves to play the piano and the violin, and she loves the outdoors. So we go on a lot of bike rides and hikes and whatnot. Her family is a large family. She's one of 7 siblings, and they're all married, and they all have between 6 and 10 children. Oh. And I'm just the opposite. I have 1 sister, and there are no ton of kids between us. So it's nice to see have these families join together.
That is awesome.
So thank you.
Yeah, I love how adoption really led you into being an adoption attorney. And I'm finding that increasingly popular as we kind of go through these interviews, is that someone seems, or most people seem to have some sort of connection back to the adoption world. You mentioned that, the opportunities to adopt your children happened rather quickly. Do you mind to share just a little bit more about that, how you were connected in your adoption?
Yeah, sure. And I think I may have misstated that on the first one, because the first one came from some friends that knew the natural mother, and we had a chance to meet her and answer all of her questions. And we had to bring ourselves up to speed too, to make sure that we were comfortable. And so it was for us, it was great. But I think, and I guess I'm old enough that I've seen the transition in adoption itself to go from kind of a cold, detached, confidential approach to a more open, everybody's on the same page and let's keep the channels open. And we were right in the middle of the forefront of that here. And so it was great. On the first one, we had that opportunity, and that openness is still out there. So it's been a wonderful thing to just experience that. On our second one, I had a friend who was an attorney, and child was born, and it's my understanding the adopted couple was looking for a boy, and it was a girl. And so they backed out the morning of the birth. And so we got a call that afternoon. My wife was out at the country club doing swim lessons with our 2-year-old son. And I said, hey, would you like to add to our family by way of another adoption, a little girl? She said, sure, someday we should do that. And I said, how about, 4:00 this afternoon? And she said, well, I need to run to Target and get some diapers and some Similac, and let's see if we can't make that happen. And so it happened, and there we were. And then a few months later, she got pregnant. So it's interesting how things play out. But we were, I guess, ready in a sense to take on that situation. I'm not a huge fan of 4 hours notice as a lawyer, because I love to give everybody a chance to get to know each other and bond and create relationships that help natural mothers with the confidence they need to go through with an important decision that's best for them and the child. Medical histories, legal risk analysis, all of that kind of goes out the window if you've only got 4 hours. But for us, it was worth jumping in, and it's worked out great. So
that is amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that. I too have been in kind of a variety of notice, if you will. I've had an opportunity where we knew for a couple of weeks, and then we had an opportunity where the baby was born, and we want to talk to you tomorrow type of situation. Can you come on down? Yeah. And you're right. There are very different experiences there, and that leads to different amount of information you can exchange and get to know each other. And my preference is always that baby's obviously safe and well cared for, no matter the amount of time. But the more you can form that relationship prior to birth, I definitely think that helps.
Does help. Yeah, it's a positive for everybody. It ends up being a win-win. It's a win for the adopted couple. It's a win for the natural mother, win for the child. So if you do it right and you have the time to do it right, it can be it's not, I mean, the decision itself, I think, is a big decision. Sometimes it's a difficult decision, but it's a good decision that the natural mother is faced with. And so, you just, the time is an element that really seems to help the process go well. So that's our immediate family. We had 3 kids under the age of 3, and our girls are 8 months apart. And if I don't explain that they're both adopted, or one's adopted and one came a month or so early, then people kind of think we're weird, but that's okay.
That's funny. They're all trying to do the math on that, going, wait a minute.
Wait a second.
Yes, that's awesome. Well, I'm excited to get to learn more from you in our conversation today, because obviously you have a rich amount of experience, both personal and professional, as it relates to adoption law and sitting on both sides of that table. I know that our conversation today is strictly for informational purposes only, that we're not creating an attorney-client relationship here. So I always want to get that disclaimer away right up front. But I would love if we could just jump into just a general overview of adoption law in Idaho. Okay. Generally, what's allowed, what's not. And if it's easier to explain it through the process, we can do that. Or if you just want to start with an overview, we can start there too.
Yeah, I appreciate that. A couple of things that I think are unique to us. We're really conservative. And so if a natural mother would benefit from financial assistance, for example, we have a criminal statute that prohibits most of that. And yet up to $500 is allowed for pregnancy-related expenses. You typically pay the vendor of those expenses or living expenses, prenatal, postnatal care, counseling, etc. $500 doesn't go very far in today's world. And so you can, with an informal application to the local court, the judge, you can get court approval going up to $2,000 for those types of expenses. And you can even go beyond that if you need to, but the court wants to be the gatekeeper on that. I think other states are, and I'm not sure what all other states do, but there are states in our western region, California, for example, and some others that I think are very liberal in that. And so that's one thing that oftentimes out-of-state adopted couples are working with maybe an out-of-state agency or something. They don't realize that particular law in Idaho. So I always try to find out, have they been helping the natural mother? Has it been reasonable? Has it been relevant to the case? And if so, then I quickly get my local judge involved and get him or her to approve that after the fact. You can even do it after the fact. So that's interesting. Idaho, I think, is very pro natural mother in the way the statutes are constructed. For example, it used to be that if she identified somebody as a possible father, you had to actually track that person down, notify them, and give them that opportunity to see what they wanted to do. But, maybe he's in Orange County, California, and you don't know the address, and you had to publish with a readership of over 4 million people or 8 million people, whatever it is today. And that publication cost between $3,000 and $5,000 just to chase down kind of a phantom person who wasn't really interested. So our laws are really, I like our laws. They say the act of intimacy itself puts a potential father on sufficient legal notice that he has the full balance of the term of the pregnancy to do whatever he'd like to do. If he can file a paternity action pre-birth and make his wishes known by registering with our putative father registry, and he can help the natural mother out with expenses. He's supposed to do that if he wants to be involved. If he doesn't do those things, then she's not obligated to track him down and try to legally get him involved and suffer that delay and that expense. So I really like that, because oftentimes in an unplanned pregnancy, there's not an intent to raise the child together or to get married and raise the child together or single parent the child. The natural mother can have the confidence that if he hasn't registered timely, she can go forward, and she is the gatekeeper. She's the parent. We all know who the mother is, unless it's a surrogacy case. So I really like that. I think we're streamlined. She can go into court soon after the child's born. There's no mandatory waiting period, but the waiting period is she has to feel well enough to go in. So if I represent the natural mother, I just make sure she's ready emotionally and legally and medically. She's off any medicines that might affect her ability to think clearly. If she had an episiotomy or something over the weekend or a C-section, then of course you wait. Idaho says, you're in as the natural parent until you appear in court. We don't have a notary. Some states allow the natural parents to sign away their rights of relinquishment by way of a notary. We don't do that. We're required to go in front of a judge, and he or she will make sure the person is competent and represented and has had a chance to have all of her wishes met, or make sure that she's comfortable with the process. So I really like that. I think that's a good thing. And it can move quickly, and it can move with some confidence that things are going to go the way she wants them to go. She's really in the driver's seat. If a natural father gets involved and he's supportive, then we build him in. We have continuing, we reach agreements, continuing contact type agreements where adopted couples and natural parents can stay in touch. If the agreement is breached in Idaho, you don't have the right to get the child back, but you do have the right to get your pictures and letters and your updates and things like that. So I like the openness that we've accomplished. Most of our natural mothers in particular qualify for pregnancy Medicaid through Idaho, which is a huge financial blessing for her and the process. It benefits the adopted couple as well. Yeah. And then the adopted couple, if things go well, come in and their insurance picks up the child's expenses. And then you have the federal adoption tax credit that now is over $14,400, and it applies whether the adoption is successful or not. And I really like that. So a lot of people can go forward with financial confidence that they can take this, risk or this experience and not get burned financially. So those are the things that kind of stick out in my mind. In Idaho, we usually do confidential admits at the hospital. If she wants her privacy protected, we make sure that we know the hospital protocols and make her wishes known, who's welcome and who's not, and what type of, who's going to be in the delivery and all of that. We usually, and then she usually wants some mementos, maybe a hospital birth certificate with a footprint, maybe an exchange of gifts, or an exchange between her and the adopted couple where she actually physically invites them in and hands the baby over, so to speak. And we create a photo album and things like that. And then whatever the agreement is going forward on continuing contact. So if I just, and that's a long answer to a short question. I'm sorry about that. Let's attack it one other way. If a natural mother, if I know there's a natural mother out there, and she calls and says, "Can you help me?" I'll say, "Yeah, let's do this. Come in. Let's just get to know each other first." And of course, in that process, I'll analyze her medical history, get a complete medical history. That's important. And I'll see what the legal risk is assess her stability and her need for counseling or not, her age, her experience. If she's 26 and already has a child that she's raising and knows how hard it is maybe to single parent a child on her own and is doing this for all the right reasons and has great family support, then she's pretty solid. If she's 14 and scared to death and has never been through it and needs all the help in the world, then we approach it a little bit differently. So we go to that point. We usually help her see what type of family she might be interested in. We also have families on file, so to speak, portfolios of prospective adopted couples. If she identifies a certain type of family, then we review those with her. And if something kind of triggers in her mind, then we set up either a telephone conference. Well, then I contact that particular adopted couple and say, "Here's the medical history, here's the legal risk, here's what she's looking for, here's how tall she is, here's her coloring, etc. Are you interested?" "Yeah, okay, great. Let's set up a first meeting, and then we'll meet in person or by telephone or by video conference and try to start and give them each a chance to kind of fill each other out. If it progresses well, then we make our wishes known to the hospital, and if there's another natural parent involved, we get him involved as well. I like to talk to grandparents too. We have some of our cultures here out west in our small communities are really pro extended family coming to the rescue at the late in the hour to attempt to be a positive resource. But sometimes it's not a positive intervention, especially if it's late in the game and grandma comes in and says, "No, I'll raise the baby," or something, and shows up at the hospital or whatever. So I like to involve extended family, make sure that everybody's on the same page if we can be.
That makes sense. So as a hopeful adoptive family, would you also, I'm assuming, have a home study that you would have completed prior to your profile being shared with a natural mother?
Correct. Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. Those home studies are great, and in Idaho they check every database. There's 5 or 6 different databases that are important for that home study. There are certain crimes that can disqualify a prospective adopted couple, and those are typically related to injury to a child. So they get a really in-depth FBI, which is federal, state of Idaho, which is state, of course, criminal background clearance. They also check child abuse registries, sex offender registries, elder abuse registries, those types of things. It's really comprehensive. So you can give the natural parents reassurance that this family, and of course they do financial, emotional, and the status of the home and all of that. But those home studies are required in Idaho before the adoptive couple can take physical custody of a child. And it's such a great thing to be able to tell the natural parents, particularly the natural mother, the family you picked, of course, is not going to be disqualified. The court's going to approve this adoption.
Yeah, it definitely makes her feel more comfortable for sure.
It does.
Yeah. So when it comes to profiles and when you're sharing that with her, are you sharing a book, a brochure, a website? Well, what is typical in your practice?
Yeah, it's been, because I'm old enough, it's usually been a portfolio or a 2 or 3 or 4 page photo album with a description of who they are. We'd like to introduce ourselves, and here's our interests, hobbies, and talents, and this is why we would like to adopt, that type of thing. With social media and the opportunities that come with that now, a lot of those portfolios are also online. They can go online and share those electronically. So we do both at this point. I like that because you can share those things instantaneously and update them and whatnot.
Yeah, that update part, I think, is really important too, because people are always looking for something more, right? Because I've talked with some expectant parents or natural parents where they're like, yeah, I've looked through the book, but then I wanted to hear them. I wanted to see them doing the thing. I wanted to see them playing in the backyard with the dog, or, whatever it is. And so going out to watch a video on a website or on a social media of, a little bit more about them seems to help really create a different level of connection and create an emotional connection on really a different level.
Yeah.
That oftentimes, I know in several cases, expectant parents have told me that made them feel more comfortable in the family that they chose. And so that it's always very interesting to see. So once they have connected and they've started forming that relationship, obviously, the amount of time you have until birth would, impact the amount of time you have in that manner. But as you kind of go through that process, you touched a little bit on it earlier, but there is financial support resources that are allowed in the state of Idaho. And as with the best practice we're hearing in many other states, it's really best for that exchange of funds and for those needs of funds to really be a conversation that happens with a natural parent and with the adoption attorney, and then with the adoption attorney back with the hopeful adoptive family, and making sure that the funds really flow legally on what is allowed and by the physical distribution of funds. Would you say that's accurate in Idaho as well?
Yes. Yeah, it's accurate. We usually will have we'll make sure the request is legitimate, and we'll verify that she's pregnant, for example. It's number one. And then 2, the providers. And then, of course, we'll have if there's an agreement and if we need court approval, we'll get it. And then we'll have the adopted couple send the funds to our trust account. We'll hold those. We'll be the gatekeeper. And then we send the preference is for us to send the money from our trust account to the provider, so I can give that evidence to the judge for his or her ultimate approval. You have to get it approved twice on the front end. And then at the time the adoption is finalized, you again, or if the child's going across state lines through the interstate compact on the placement of children, you want to document that. And then for the federal adoption tax credit, to be able to take those expenses, you use the same financial trail and documentation. So yeah, it's really, really great if the adopted couple has done some of that just on their own before we get involved. Then we shore it up a little bit and make sure it's presentable to the IRS and also to the court. But I think that's very it's important for us to know that money is not the driving factor. Right. The driving factor is the best interest of the mother and the child, and if a father's involved, of course, for him as well, and not the money. So, and Idaho is maybe tailored me to think that way, but that's the way we approach it, and that's the way Idaho approaches it. So, if there's a need and it's legitimate and it's reasonable, typically the courts are very, very supportive. But ultimately, the court will be the gatekeeper, and we'll have 2 looks at it on the front end and on the finalization end as well.
That makes a lot of sense. I always caution hopeful adoptive families, if you get into a situation where you're connecting directly and you don't yet have an attorney involved, please do not share money at all. Get an attorney involved before you do anything to make sure that you're just protecting yourself and protecting the opportunity.
Yeah, I agree. And then the other thing I love to do is oftentimes a natural mother will call me and say, will you help me and will you represent me? Yes, I'd love to. But she may not be here in our local town of Twin Falls, Idaho. She might be elsewhere in the state. I love to go to the facility itself and let them know I'm coming. I try to find out what their protocol is. And then I go up and I walk through the hospital with the natural mother 3 or 4 months before the baby's born. We meet the staff. I find out who's going to be on call over the weekend. They're usually different than the people that are there that you meet on Wednesday at 10 in the morning versus Saturday afternoon at 2 or Sunday at 1 or Christmas morning. It's odd. In my practice, it seems like if there's a holiday, the baby's going to be born on the holiday. And so I want to know. And so it's just so helpful to have been there and know the people involved. The key people involved is so critical, I think, even at that practical local level. And each hospital has different protocols or have no protocols.
Mm-hmm.
So you might get a call, hey, Mr. Browning, Bart, would you tell us what to do? Yeah, okay, great. This is how you do it. And I'll send you the documents that we've used with other hospitals in the area, and you can run them by whomever and then help them through the process. But, everybody's usually very supportive. They realize it's a great decision and they want to help out. But I don't like proceeding when I don't have all the answers that make me comfortable. So I'm going to make sure I'm super comfortable. And I usually do that doing practical things by visiting. And then I sit down with the hospital person in charge of adoptions. It's usually a nurse. And I go through all their protocols and documents, and then I bring them home and review them with the natural mother. For me, it's really important to get all the legal documents and the medical documents if I'm representing her, and even if I'm not, to have her be comfortable with those and look at those 2 or 3 months before the baby comes versus laying in the hospital bed, just having given birth and going through all the normal emotions and transitions that go on, let alone on top of that, going through with her decision and then saying, oh, by the way, here's 30 pages of hospital paperwork I'd like you to review. And she's not even, up to that. So I think the timing on that's been one thing I've learned is the more I can do before she ever goes to the hospital and make her feel comfortable so she's not preoccupied with the legal and she's not preoccupied with the hospital. She's preoccupied with getting through safely and getting the child through safely. And then in Idaho, she has the right to change her mind up to any time before she goes into court. So she's the timekeeper on that. And I always revisit that issue with her and make sure she's ready to go. And then we just schedule it at her convenience and the court's convenience. And then we make it happen. And then at that point, it's a win-win, I hope. Typically, it always has been if it's handled that way.
Yeah, I love your attention to detail in the hospital process. That's something I recently created a guide for my community around the Hopeful Adoptive Parents Guide to, the hospital time, right? Because to your point, there are legal and logistical things that happen, and then there are emotional things that happen, right? And the better you can be prepared on understanding the logistical things like, can I go to the hospital, right? Is that part of my agreement with her? Where does she want me? Then second, will the hospital allow me to be there? And if they allow me to be there, what does that then look like? Can I be, on the same floor in a different hallway? Like, what are those logistical things? Are they prepared for us to show up? If we get the phone call from her, to your point, on, whatever holiday, random Saturday afternoon that, she's in labor and it's time to be there. The last thing you want to do is travel and get there and then say, no, we didn't think you were coming. You're not allowed, right? Yeah. So preparing for that. And then from my own personal experience, we, with our son, his first mother had decided that we had the opportunity to make medical decisions for him once he was born. She gave us that power of attorney. But one of the doctors there didn't want us to make medical decisions on his behalf. And so any decision that came up for his care in those first few hours, we would, say what we wanted. And he would say, you don't have the authority to make that decision. And I would say, power of attorney, we do have that authority to make the decision. No, we have to go back and talk to her. And I'm like, oh, that's fine. I understand, where we are. But also for her, if she's given those decisions to us, then that kind of puts her back in the situation of like wondering what's going on. And so I had to have a, conversation with her and just say, hey, listen, we are fully comfortable in making these decisions. Here are the questions we're being asked. Here's what we're, thinking from a decision perspective. The doctor wants to hear your final word. It is your final call, right? And in her situation, she was like, well, I wish they wouldn't do that because I gave you the power of attorney. I want you to make these decisions because I want to move on, with my healing journey. To your point, having kind of all of those ducks in a row as much as you can so that if you get into that situation, you feel prepared because your emotions are running a bit high on both sides of the table, so to speak, for sure.
Yeah, they are. Just a side issue on medical coverage. With Obamacare came along some great opportunities for adult children who may still be living at home up to a certain age, 25 or 26, to remain on their parents' health insurance, but a lot of those health insurance policies, they cover the child, the 24-year-old, 25-year-old child in that family dynamic, but they don't cover a pregnancy of that dependent. They cover the dependent, but there's a dependent pregnancy exemption from coverage. And so, sometimes a natural mother will come in and I'll say, do you have health insurance? She says, yeah, I'm covered on my folks' health insurance. And I'll say, well, let's read it. Let's get a copy and go through it, because it probably covers you for a sore throat or tonsillectomy or flu or whatever. But I doubt it covers the maternity that you're going through. So it's been helpful to flush that out. And if it doesn't, then Idaho typically will look at the natural mother uniquely during the time of her pregnancy and not disqualify her from Medicaid eligibility based on the fact she's living at home and her dad and mom are still working, or one of them's working and there's an income in the home. They'll say, no, for purposes of this, we're going to treat you as a separate entity and see if we can't get you Medicaid qualified. So I always like to go that route too, just to make sure that people aren't working under a misassumption, that's incorrect assumption on issues like that, because her pregnancy bills are going to be the most expensive. And then if there's a problem, then you really got to, if you have a really big medical bill that's sitting there, oftentimes an adopted couple cannot assume that financial risk. So it's helpful to do that too. Those are nuances that you kind of learn along the way, but
for sure,
it's good to give that reassurance.
Yeah. And kudos to you again for doing that due diligence, because again, not all attorneys take the time to figure out what is covered and not covered. And I've definitely heard some instances where people, have surprise bills for, something like that comes up, even months after delivery and finalization. And it's like, oh, this isn't covered. And how are we going to accomplish this? Could be rather scary.
And I know this is another nuance, but I put in the paperwork, and it probably hasn't happened as recently as it used to, but sometimes we've had insurance companies say, well, she didn't actually place the baby till 2 days after the child was born. Therefore, there's 2 days of uncovered. We're not going to pay for those first 2 days. And of course, the first day is the delivery, right?
Yeah.
So I make sure that the placement is retroactive, effective the moment the child's born. So there's no insurance argument there that they're not going to cover.
That's really important. Yeah, that insurance gap can get you. That's funny. Well, this has been just so helpful. So I know we talked a little bit earlier about the fact that sometimes people are connecting through agencies, but also sometimes people are connecting through a friend of a friend, or, through a random introduction, maybe in a church community. Is that something, or like self-matching? I know it's also called independent matching. Some people call it private adoption. I know it goes by many different names. Is that generally allowed in your state?
It happens with social media. It happens all the time. It's not being prosecuted. It's not being punished. We do have a criminal statute that says advertising for adoption is prohibited unless you are an agency or you are a licensed attorney. The attorney can broadcast or can advertise his or her services. The agency can do what they do, but the private person isn't supposed to do that. That's a little different. Advertising is a little bit different than reaching out. So if you know somebody and there's a lead, yes, you can contact that person directly and try to match yourselves. That's okay. But to actually put yourself out there is not, although you see it all the time, because agencies and other people that are trying to help, whether they're facilitators or strictly helping maybe adopted couples get their portfolios out on the internet, for example. I'm not sure they're familiar with Idaho law. And again, it's not that Idaho is, the prosecutors aren't really paying attention to that. I don't think they care, but it's an issue that's, I care because it's a crime and you don't want to you don't want to have your clients commit a crime. So, you got to be careful in Idaho. I think our legislature ought to be approached with an updated statute now that social media can go with a keystroke on your computer. Your portfolio can go worldwide. The other thing I found with social media, it used to be that if an Idaho person got pregnant, they were typically kind of looking to make a match locally or somewhere in the state, that type of thing, working through schools, junior high schools, or counselors, or physicians, or attorneys, or all of us, or hospitals, whatever, religious help through their clergy, etc. And with social media now, it appears to me that they just get online and they just push a button and tend to pick somebody without much forethought. That's not true in every instance, but I've had a case where a natural mother was here in Twin, and she got online and picked an agency out of state, back east somewhere, for example. And then the agency called me and said, "Would you, since you're Quad A attorney, and you do this all the time, would you represent us? Would you represent this natural mother and help us out in Twin Falls, Idaho?" And yet here she is, down the street from me to begin with, and it kind of went full circle. And I think you find that more and more today. I'm surprised in our not that we have yellow pages anymore, but if you go to what used to be yellow pages, you'll see a lot of out-of-state advertisers that are not agencies and they're not attorneys.
Yeah.
And there's a ton of that going on, and some of their fees are, I think, are excessive or exorbitant. So I think there needs to be some protections at least, and I try to help. The earlier I get involved, the better, because a lot of money can go out the door early if you're not careful. Mm-hmm. But so the matching, you can match all day long privately, but you cannot do it publicly, officially as an advertisement. So you got to be a little bit careful. And if you're an adopted couple working with an agency and you're in Idaho, you better be aware of that. Or if you're out of state and you're going to be running that portfolio and they're going to reach out to Idaho, just know that that's currently not allowed.
Yeah. Well, I always coach people, like, the very first thing you want to do is to figure out what method of matching, right? And then get your partner lined up, right? So are you going to work directly with an attorney to match? Then great, go find your attorney. If you're going to work directly with an agency to match, but if you're going to try to self-match, then you need to still get that attorney involved from the front. So you understand, one, is self-matching allowed in your state? Two, how can you share your intention to adopt legally in your state or in other states that you might be considering? And that your adoption attorney, you will have to have one in your state to represent you, in making sure that you connect with them and they get you the proper legal advice to say, this is what you're allowed to do, and then go create your profile and go share it, or go get your home study lined up, or go take those other steps that you need to do. Of course, I have a course where I teach people all the steps, right, and give recommendations on who to reach out to. But you want to do those steps intentionally, because one, it's going to save you from putting an opportunity at risk, to spending money unnecessarily, right? And if you do those steps out of order, you're going to cost yourself time in the process and cost yourself potentially money, to your point, if you go and put together this full portfolio that you cannot use based upon the laws in your state. So you want to be really mindful of that for sure. Yeah. Well, our conversation has been terrific today. I'd love just to wrap it up by asking if there's any advice that you have for those that are just starting the journey, or maybe that have been on the journey for a minute, just from your perspective and experience in being an adoption attorney and an adoptive parent.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I just want to, before I answer that, I just want to mention the Indian Child Welfare Act is still floating around out there, kind of, and states are, whatever happens federally, they are considering codifying it at the state level. So there are issues out there that I'm not sure that I would expect adoptive couples to even be aware of. And these laws are good in their inception and their intent and are there, but there are certain laws that you have to represent to the court. You've complied with them, or you've gone down the road and see that it doesn't apply, and you've given that the adopt. And so it's important to know those risks up front. I think adoption has changed a lot in the last, I've been doing this since 1985, so however many years that is, but I think it's changed for the better, in the sense that it's more natural parent driven now, meeting their needs, and they are the key players. And then the adoptive couples, I think, are able to proceed with confidence if they do it in the right way, and maybe not with as much financial risk as there has been in the past. So I'm grateful that we have federal subsidies and help and tax credits. There are other financial benefits available at the state level. Idaho has some subsidies too. If you're in the foster program, for example, and you adopt, you can qualify for some help, et cetera. It's a great way to augment your family. And it's also a great way to give natural parents an option that can work to be a great option for them and the child. So I love this part of the law. It's more of a building families and helping them avoid any emotional or legal or financial pitfalls that may be out there. And if everybody's educated and feel like it's best for them, it's neat to see kind of an emotional, psychological, even spiritual confirmation at some point during the process to both sides, especially to the natural mother, and if there's one involved, the natural father, where they really transition psychologically and start thinking about knowing that this is they've got a affirmation that this is great for them and the child, and all of a sudden they're excited about it, and they start thinking about this new family that they're helping to create, and they stay in touch, or they stay part of that kind of extended group. That has been a real positive change versus, way back in the day when there wasn't any information shared. It was strictly confidential. The cases were closed. The doors were slammed. And I'm not sure there was enough of that. And I don't know how you heal or get through that process if you're a vulnerable young parent trying to make this, lifetime decision, what's best for your child. So I'm grateful that we've gone down this road. I think the practice itself is a wonderful thing to do. I'm glad I've specialized in it, so to speak, as an Idaho attorney. And there's a huge need for the service, I think, whether it's agencies or us or others. But I'm glad to be part of it, and I look forward to continue to do that.
Yeah,
I'm glad I've done it for the last, I can't even count back that far, but let's see, 85 plus 15 is 2000 plus 23. So it's been 38 years or something.
That is terrific. Well, that experience has definitely been helpful in our conversation today. And I know the audience will find our conversation helpful. How can they reach out to you and get in contact with you if they're interested in adopting in Idaho?
I appreciate that. They can call our Twin Falls, Idaho number, and it's 208-733-7180. My email address is, it's my initials, Bart David Browning. So it's bdb@johnsonmaylaw.com. And we do have a great website at Johnson May. It's a full service law firm out of Boise. I'm the Twin Falls guy. I've been in Twin Falls since forever. And there's two of us here, and then there's a large number up in Boise. But our firm goes back. Great grandfather started the firm, Alfred May, and then his son, James May, became a district court judge and started the Idaho Trial Lawyers Association. And then his son, J.D. May, is my senior partner, and his J.D.'s son is my junior partner. And so we've been doing this for a long time, and adoption has always been something that we're happy to do. So that's how you get a hold of us. And I'm the guy, so just ask for me and we'll get you pointed in the right direction. Awesome. And I don't mind doing free consults either. I'm more than happy to answer questions and point people in the right direction. And if we can't do it, we'll find somebody that can do it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Bart. And we'll be sure and link to all of your information in the show notes where people are watching or listening. They can easily find your information. But we really appreciate you coming on the show today. And we look forward to our audience connecting with you in the future.
All right. Thank you, Amanda. It's been great. Thanks for the opportunity.
Wow. Wasn't that a great conversation? I really loved how Bart broke it down step by step and really kind of gave us the nuances within Idaho law. I thought it was really interesting to know that it is okay to self-match if you're connecting one-to-one, but it's definitely not okay from an advertising perspective to go and share your profile more broadly. I do think it's also amazing that Bart is willing to accept profiles to kind of keep and share with expectant parents or natural mothers, as he called them, as they are looking for adoptive families to match with. So I definitely would take Bart up on that opportunity to reach out to him in the show notes so that you can connect with him, learn a little bit more about the process in Idaho, and potentially even share your profile with him so that he can keep it on file. Remember, my friend, anything's possible with the right plan and support. I've got the step by step process for you inside the Adoption Self Matching Program, including that amazing guide to navigating hospital time as an adoptive family. So, if you want to learn more about that, you can check out the show notes to see that as well. You've got this, my friend. I'm here with you every single step of the way, and I'll see you in our next episode.